Deadweight doesn't belong on my range.
Sergeant Mason's fist slammed down on the metal table with such force that the sound echoed across Fort Bragg's sprawling rifle range, causing 200 soldiers to turn their heads in unison. Emma Thompson stood frozen near the entrance, her small frame dwarfed by the weight of the personnel files she clutched against her chest. Her hands trembled visibly, a rhythmic shake that made the papers rustle like autumn leaves in a storm. Mason pushed himself away from the table, his 6-foot frame casting a long shadow across the dusty ground as he strode toward her. The morning sun caught the sergeant's stripes on his sleeve, and his combat boots kicked up small clouds of red North Carolina dirt with each heavy step. "Look what we got here, boys!" His voice carried that particular brand of military arrogance that came from 3 tours in Afghanistan and a chest full of ribbons he made sure everyone noticed. Administrative sent us a little mouse who probably can't tell a trigger from a safety lever. The crowd erupted in harsh laughter, phones already rising to capture what they assumed would be premium entertainment. Emma's eyes remained downcast, focused on a spot of dried mud on her worn combat boots. The gray t-shirt she wore looked like it had been washed 100 times too many, the fabric thin enough that the outline of her dog tags showed through. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a regulation bun so tight it pulled at her temples, revealing a face that might have been pretty if it wasn't so pale with apparent fear. I'm just here to deliver these reports to Captain Rivera." Emma's voice barely rose above a whisper, each word fighting its way past lips that trembled almost as much as her hands. The papers in her arms shifted, and one slipped free, floating to the ground where the morning breeze caught it and sent it tumbling across the range. "Reports?" Lieutenant Brooks emerged from the crowd, his lean frame moving with the predatory grace of someone who enjoyed being second in command to a bully. His buzz cut was so fresh you could still see the razor marks, and his smile held all the warmth of a shark circling wounded prey. "Since when does admin personally deliver reports to the range? What are you really doing here, clerk?" Emma bent to retrieve the fallen paper, her movements slow and deliberate, like someone afraid that any sudden motion might trigger an attack. As she reached down, her hands shook so violently that she had to make 3 attempts before successfully grasping the document. The sight drew more laughter from the assembled soldiers, and someone in the back shouted, "Maybe she's having withdrawals! Check her for track marks!" Captain Rivera's office door opened, with a metallic screech that cut through the noise. The captain himself stepped out, his expression unreadable behind dark aviator sunglasses that reflected the morning sun. Unlike Mason's bulk or Brooks's wiry aggression, Rivera carried himself with the cold efficiency of a man who'd risen through the ranks by knowing exactly when to apply pressure and when to step back and watch others do his dirty work. "What's the disturbance, Sergeant Mason?" Rivera's voice carried that deceptive calm that anyone who had served under him knew meant trouble was brewing beneath the surface. Mason straightened to attention, though his smirk remained firmly in place. "Sir, we've got administrative personnel disrupting morning qualifications. This clerk claims she has reports for you, but I think she's just lost, sir." Rivera's hidden gaze shifted to Emma, taking in her trembling form with the calculating assessment of a predator evaluating prey. "Is that so? Well, we can't have non-combat personnel wandering onto an active range without proper clearance." He paused, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. "Tell me, Miss Thompson, sir." "Emma Thompson." Her voice cracked on her own name, as if even that simple identification was too much for her to handle. "Thompson," Rivera rolled the name around his tongue like he was tasting wine. "Since you're here disrupting my range time, and since Sergeant Mason seems to think you don't belong, perhaps you should prove you have a right to be on this range at all." He gestured toward the firing line where soldiers were preparing for the annual marksmanship qualification that would determine everything from promotions to special assignments. "Take a shot. Hit the 100-yard target, and you can deliver your reports. Miss it, and you're banned from this range permanently." Emma's face went even paler, if that was possible. "Sir, I'm just administrative staff. I haven't qualified on weapons since basic training 5 years ago." "Then this should be interesting," Brooks interjected, already pulling out his phone to record. "Hey everyone, the paper pusher's gonna shoot. This ought to be good for a laugh." The crowd pressed closer, forming a semicircle around Emma. She could smell their morning coffee breath, the gun oil on their hands, the testosterone and adrenaline that always filled the air before qualifications. Her trembling intensified, the papers in her arms rustling loudly in the sudden quiet that had fallen over the range. But what none of them noticed, what only someone trained to observe the minutest details might have caught, was the way Emma's feet had unconsciously shifted into a shooter's stance the moment Rivera mentioned taking a shot, or how her breathing, despite her apparent panic, had settled into the steady rhythm of someone conserving oxygen for precision work, or how her eyes, when she thought no one was looking, had already calculated wind speed, distance, and trajectory to 3 different targets without conscious thought. If you're feeling that burning anger at how Emma is being treated right now, you're not alone. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because what happens next will completely flip everything you think you know about strength and courage. By the way, I'm curious, where are you watching this story from? Drop your country in the comments below. I love seeing our military family from around the world come together to witness justice being served. Mason grabbed an old M24 sniper rifle from the equipment rack, the weapon looking like it had seen better decades. The barrel was scratched, the scope was clouded with age, and the stock had been repaired with duct tape in at least 3 places. He shoved it toward Emma with enough force that she stumbled backward, barely maintaining her grip on both the rifle and her papers. "There you go, dead weight," Mason sneered, emphasizing the insult like it was her new name. "Try not to shoot yourself in the foot. Or maybe do might save us all some time." Emma set her papers down on a nearby bench, her movements still shaky, but somehow more purposeful now. She picked up the rifle with both hands, and for just a moment, so brief that those watching would later swear they imagined it, her trembling stopped completely. Her fingers found their positions on the weapon with the kind of muscle memory that came from handling thousands of rifles over countless hours. But then the shaking returned, worse than before, and she nearly dropped the weapon. Private Jessica Martinez, standing near the equipment table, was one of the few not laughing. Fresh out of advanced training, she hadn't yet developed the calloused cruelty that seemed to be a requirement for fitting in at Fort Bragg. She watched Emma struggle with the rifle and felt something twist in her stomach. "This isn't right," she whispered to the soldier next to her, who just shrugged and kept recording. "Safety off, Thompson," Rivera called out, his tone suggesting he was enjoying this impromptu entertainment. "Unless you've forgotten that too, along with how to hold a weapon properly." Emma's thumb found the safety without looking, flicking it off with a motion so smooth and practiced that Master Sergeant Davis, who'd been observing from the qualification tower, leaned forward with sudden interest. Davis had been running range qualifications for 15 years. He'd seen every kind of shooter from Olympic hopefuls to complete disasters, and something about the way this trembling clerk handled that safety didn't match the rest of her apparent incompetence. Brooks decided the humiliation wasn't progressing fast enough for his taste. He walked up behind Emma and gave her a sharp push between the shoulder blades. "Come on, clerk! We don't have all day. Some of us have real qualifications to complete." Emma stumbled forward, her knee hitting the dirt hard enough to tear a hole in her already worn uniform pants. The impact sent a cloud of dust into the air, coating her gray t-shirt with a fine layer of red dirt. But as she pushed herself back up, those watching from the right angle might have noticed the way she rolled through the fall, distributing the impact across her body in a way that minimized actual damage, the kind of fall training that special operators spent months perfecting. "Look at her," Mason laughed, pointing at Emma's dirt-covered form. "Can't even stand up straight. This is what happens when the military goes soft, letting desk jockeys think they belong with real soldiers." Emma stood slowly, her head still down, blonde hair now disheveled with several strands escaping her tight bun. She walked to the firing line, each step measured despite her visible trembling. The morning sun was climbing higher now, casting sharp shadows across the range and making the heat shimmer rise from the packed earth. The wind had picked up too. Weather station would later report gusts up to 40 miles per hour that morning, sending dust devils spinning across the firing lanes. "Perfect conditions for her to fail," Rivera said to no one in particular, though his voice carried to everyone watching. "Can't hit a target at 100 yards in perfect conditions. Definitely can't do it with this wind." Emma approached the firing position, and that's when things started to feel different. Despite her shaking hands, despite the dirt covering half her body, despite the mockery raining down from all sides, she moved to the prone position with a fluidity that made Davis sit up straighter in his tower. Her body flowed down to the ground like water, each movement transitioning seamlessly into the next. It was the kind of motion that took years to develop, the kind that became so ingrained in muscle memory that no amount of nerves could completely override it. She settled behind the rifle, and her breathing changed. The rapid, panicked breaths of a frightened clerk transformed into something else entirely, the controlled, measured breathing of someone preparing for precision work. In through the nose for 4 counts, hold for 4, out through the mouth for 4. It was subtle enough that most missed it, but Davis saw it. So did someone else in the crowd, someone who had been watching with increasing interest from beneath the brim of a worn baseball cap. Emma's trembling hands wrapped around the rifle, finding their grip with surprising certainty. She pulled the weapon into her shoulder, and despite the shaking that continued to rack her body, the rifle itself remained remarkably steady. It was as if her tremors were operating on a different frequency than her grip on the weapon, the two somehow existing independently of each other. Mason noticed it too, and his laughter faltered for just a moment. "Hey, Brooks, you seeing this?" Brooks was indeed seeing it, though he wasn't quite sure what it was yet. "She's just lucky the rifle's heavy enough to dampen her shakes. Watch, she'll completely miss the target." Emma's eye found the scope, and she made a series of minute adjustments that would have been impressive from someone who supposedly hadn't touched a rifle in 5 years. Each click of the adjustment knobs was precise, calculated. She was compensating for the wind, for the distance, even for the known defects in this particular rifle's scope. Defects she couldn't possibly have known about, unless she'd either shot this exact weapon before, or had such extensive experience with damaged equipment that she could diagnose problems by feel alone. The range fell quiet. Even the mockers had stopped at their commentary, sensing that something was happening, even if they couldn't quite identify what. 200 pairs of eyes focused on the small woman lying in the dirt, her gray t-shirt now so dusty it looked brown, her blonde hair catching the sunlight where it had escaped her bun. Emma's finger found the trigger, resting gently on it without applying pressure. Her breathing slowed even further, and those closest to her could see her counting something under her breath. Later, ballistics experts reviewing the range footage would identify it as wind intervals. She was timing the gusts, waiting for the perfect window between them. The wind died for just a moment. Emma's finger squeezed the trigger with the kind of smooth, consistent pressure that took thousands of rounds to perfect. The rifle cracked, the sound sharp and clean in the morning air. The bullet hole appeared dead center in the 100-yard target's bullseye. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved, nobody spoke. The only sound was the wind picking back up, sending an empty shell casing rolling across the concrete with a metallic tinkle. Then Mason's voice shattered the silence. "Lucky shot!" He practically screamed it, as if volume alone could make it true. "Pure lucky shot! No way a pencil pusher makes that shot on purpose." Emma stood slowly, her movements returning to the shaky, uncertain motions of a frightened clerk. She handed the rifle back toward Mason, her hands trembling so badly now that he had to grab it quickly before she dropped it. Can I deliver my reports now, sir?" She addressed Rivera, her voice back to its whispered, frightened tone. Rivera pulled off his sunglasses, revealing eyes that had gone from amused to calculating. No, I don't think so. That was indeed lucky, Thompson. Anyone can get lucky once." He smiled, but it was the cold smile of a predator who'd just noticed something interesting about what he'd thought was prey. "Since you've disrupted our qualification schedule, you're going to complete the entire course, all of it, every stage that our combat personnel have to pass." "Sir, That's an order, Thompson." Rivera's voice cut through her protest like a blade. "Unless you'd prefer I write you up for insubordination, I'm sure your administrative supervisor would love to hear how you've been wandering onto restricted ranges without authorization." Emma's shoulders sagged in apparent defeat. Around her, the crowd was buzzing with renewed excitement. If she'd gotten lucky once, watching her fail spectacularly at the rest would be even more entertaining. "This is going to be epic," Brooks said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Someone make sure you're getting this on video. We'll be watching this at every unit party for the next year." Master Sergeant Davis climbed down from his tower, his movements deliberate and thoughtful. He'd seen something in that shot that the others had missed. It wasn't just the accuracy. Anyone could occasionally get lucky with accuracy. It was the fundamentals, the breathing, the trigger squeeze, the follow-through. Those weren't things you got lucky with. Those were things that were beaten into you through endless repetition until they became more natural than walking. He approached Captain Rivera, speaking low enough that only the captain could hear. "Sir, that wasn't luck. That was—" "I know what it was, Sergeant," Rivera cut him off, his eyes never leaving Emma's trembling form. "The question is what we're going to do about it." Davis frowned. "Sir, if she's who I think she might be—" "She's not." Rivera's tone brooked no argument. "She's Emma Thompson, administrative specialist, according to her file. Nothing more, nothing less. And we're going to prove that definitively, one way or another. Emma had moved to the preparation area, where other soldiers were getting ready for their qualifications. She looked absolutely miserable, her dirty clothes and shaking hands making her stand out like a sparrow among hawks. Private Jessica Martinez approached her, offering a bottle of water. "Here," Jessica said quietly. "You're going to need to hydrate if you're doing the full course." Emma looked up, and for just a moment, Jessica saw something in those eyes that made her take an involuntary step backward. It wasn't fear she saw there, it was assessment. The kind of cold, calculating assessment that Jessica had only seen once before, in the eyes of a Special Forces operator who'd given a demonstration at her advanced training. But then Emma blinked, and the moment passed. "Thank you," she whispered, accepting the water with visibly trembling hands. "That's very kind." As Emma drank, her right hand unconsciously moved to adjust something at her wrist. A nervous gesture, most would assume. But the object her fingers found wasn't jewelry or a watch. It was a specialized medical wrist brace, carbon fiber construction barely visible beneath her sleeve. The advanced neurological support system, originally developed for combat surgeons who needed to maintain precise hand control while under fire, cost over $12,000 and used precision sensors to compensate for nerve-damaged tremors. Similar technology was now helping thousands of veterans regain fine motor control after battlefield injuries, though civilian insurance rarely covered these military-grade therapeutic devices. The 500-yard targets were being set up now. This was where real marksmanship began to separate itself from luck. At 500 yards, every minor imperfection in technique was magnified. Wind became a major factor. The Earth's rotation, the Coriolis effect, actually had to be taken into account. Heart rate could throw off a shot. Even breathing at the wrong moment could mean the difference between a hit and a miss. Mason made sure Emma got the worst firing position, the one where the wind would affect her shots the most. "There you go, Thompson. Lane 15. Try not to embarrass yourself too badly." Emma walked to her assigned position, her steps uncertain, stumbling slightly over an equipment bag someone had conveniently left in her path. But as she settled into position, prone again, the rifle pulled tight into her shoulder, that strange transformation happened once more. The trembling didn't stop, but it seemed to find a rhythm, a pattern that somehow worked with her shooting stance rather than against it. Brooks decided more active disruption was needed. He positioned himself right next to her lane and started doing jumping jacks, his boots striking the ground hard enough to create vibrations she would feel. "Don't mind me, Thompson. Just getting my warm-up in. Real soldiers need to stay ready." Emma didn't react. Her eye was already in the scope, making tiny adjustments that spoke to an intimate understanding of ballistics. She was calculating wind drift, bullet drop, even the slight cant in the rifle's barrel that would pull shots marginally to the left, a defect in this particular weapon that she couldn't possibly have known about without having fired it before. The range officer called for shooters to fire when ready. Most of the other soldiers qualifying took their time, making careful adjustments, checking and rechecking their calculations. Emma didn't hesitate. 5 shots rang out in rapid succession, so fast that they almost sounded like automatic fire. "Cease fire! Cease fire!" Davis called out, genuine alarm in his voice. "Thompson, what the hell do you think you're doing?" Emma looked up from the scope, blinking as if coming out of a trance. I'm sorry, sir. I thought we were supposed to fire when ready. 1 shot at a time for scoring, not..." Davis stopped mid-sentence as the electronic scoring system updated. All 5 shots had hit not just the target, but the exact same hole. At 500 yards, she'd put 5 rounds through a space smaller than a quarter. The range went silent again, but this time the quality of the silence was different. This wasn't the pause of surprise at a lucky shot. This was the kind of silence that fell when people realized they were witnessing something extraordinary, something that challenged their understanding of what was possible. "That's..." someone in the crowd started to say, then stopped, unable to finish the thought. "Impossible," Mason finished for them, but his voice lacked conviction. "That's impossible. The scope on that rifle is damaged. The barrel's warped. There's no way..." "Yet she did it," Davis interrupted, his voice carrying a mixture of awe and suspicion. 5 rounds, 1 hole, 500 yards, with damaged equipment and 40-mile-per-hour wind gusts. Rivera was already on his phone, speaking rapidly to someone. His end of the conversation was clipped, professional, but those standing nearby caught fragments. Need a records check. Emma Thompson? No, deeper than that. Classified archives. Meanwhile, Emma had stood up and was shakily trying to clear the rifle, her trembling hands fumbling with the bolt. It was such a stark contrast to the inhuman precision she'd just displayed that several observers experienced a kind of mental whiplash trying to reconcile the two. Lucky shots, Brooks insisted, but he was sweating now despite the morning coolness. She probably zeroed in on that exact spot during basic training. Muscle memory, that's all. But Davis was shaking his head. That's not muscle memory from basic training. That's... He paused, choosing his words carefully. I've only seen shooting like that from one type of soldier. What type? Jessica asked, genuinely curious. Davis looked at Emma, who was now pretending to struggle with removing the rifle's magazine. Ghost units. Special operators who don't officially exist. Soldiers who are trained to be invisible until the moment they need to be lethal. The crowd murmured at this, phones coming out to Google ghost units and finding exactly nothing, which somehow made the suggestion even more intriguing. That's ridiculous, Mason said, too loudly, too forcefully. Look at her. She's a clerk. She can barely stand without shaking. As if to emphasize his point, Emma chose that moment to trip over her own feet, stumbling forward and catching herself on a table. The movement caused her gray t-shirt to ride up slightly in the back, and for just a moment, barely a flash, something dark was visible on her lower back. It looked like the bottom edge of something, perhaps a tattoo, but it was covered again so quickly that no one could be sure what they'd seen. Can you feel the tension building? If Emma's hidden skills are making your heart race, smash that like button right now. Your support helps more people discover these incredible stories of hidden warriors. What do you think she's really hiding? Drop your theory in the comments. The best guess gets a heart from me. Rivera closed his phone, his expression unreadable. The 1,000-yard range is being prepared. Thompson, you'll continue. Sir, Emma protested weakly, I really need to deliver these reports. My supervisor will... Your supervisor will understand that you're following a direct order from a superior officer, Rivera cut her off. Unless you'd like me to call them and explain how you've been disrupting official training exercises. Emma's shoulders sagged further. No, sir. The 1,000-yard range was where even expert marksmen began to struggle. At that distance, bullets took nearly 2 seconds to reach their target. Wind could push them feet off course. The smallest tremor, the slightest imperfection in trigger pull would result in a complete miss. They gave Emma the same damaged rifle, the same terrible firing position. But now Brooks and Mason had recruited others to help disrupt her. A group of soldiers started doing drill formations right behind her, their synchronized footfalls creating rhythmic vibrations. Someone turned on a portable radio, blasting music until Davis ordered them to turn it off. Even then, they found ways to make noise, to create distractions. Emma settled into position once again, and once again that transformation occurred. Her breathing slowed to almost nothing. Her trembling seemed to synchronize with her heartbeat, creating a predictable pattern she could work with. She made adjustments to the scope that were so precise, so specific, that Davis found himself holding his breath. No way she makes this shot, Mason said, but it sounded more like a prayer than a prediction. Emma's finger found the trigger. She waited, patient as a hunting cat, reading the wind patterns like most people read books. 10 seconds passed, 20, 30. The crowd grew restless, but she didn't move except for those constant tremors that should have made accurate shooting impossible. Then, between one heartbeat and the next, she fired. The bullet took 1.7 seconds to travel the 1,000 yards. When it impacted, it struck dead center of the bullseye. This time, the silence lasted longer. This time, even Mason couldn't immediately cry luck. Because everyone there, from the newest private to the most experienced sergeant, understood what they'd just witnessed. That wasn't luck. That wasn't muscle memory from basic training. That was the kind of shot that maybe 50 people in the entire United States military could make consistently. And most of them were names whispered in classified briefings that none of these soldiers would ever attend. Rivera was on his phone again, his voice urgent now. I need that information now. Yes, I'll wait. What do you mean the file's sealed? By whose authority? Davis had pulled out his own phone and was scrolling through something, his face growing paler with each swipe. He approached Emma, who was standing up and dusting off her dirty gray t-shirt with shaking hands. That shooting pattern, he said quietly. 442, I've seen it before. Emma looked at him with those frightened, trembling eyes. I don't know what you mean, sir. 4 seconds breathing interval, 4 seconds hold, 2 seconds trigger squeeze. It's very specific, very unique. Davis leaned closer. They said the soldier who developed that technique died 3 years ago. Operation Phantom Desert. For just a moment, Emma went completely still. Not even her hands trembled. Then the shaking resumed, worse than before. I don't know anything about that, sir. Davis studied her for a long moment, then stepped back. But his eyes never left her as Rivera announced the next challenge. 2,100 yards, Rivera declared, and a gasp went through the crowd. The standing record for this range, set 15 years ago by a Special Forces sniper who went on to become a legend before he was killed in Afghanistan. No one's come close since. Sir, that's beyond the effective range of the M24, someone protested. Then Thompson should have no problem failing, should she? Rivera's smile was cold. Unless, of course, our administrative clerk has more surprises for us. The 2,100-yard range required moving to a different section of the complex, one with specialized equipment and reinforced barriers. As the crowd moved, following Emma's small, trembling form like sharks following a bleeding seal, conversations buzzed with speculation. Maybe she's former special ops who got medically discharged. With those shakes, no way they'd let her anywhere near special operations. Could be an act. Maybe this is some kind of test. Test for what? To see how gullible we are? Emma stumbled again as they walked, this time catching herself on Brooks's arm. He jerked away like her touch burned, and she mumbled an apology. But in that brief moment of contact, Brooks felt something that made him frown. Her arm, beneath the thin gray t-shirt, was corded with muscle. Not the bulky muscle of a gym rat, but the lean, functional muscle of someone who had spent years carrying heavy loads over long distances. The 2,100-yard range had a different atmosphere. This was where the base's elite came to train, where Special Forces snipers refined their craft. The targets here weren't simple bullseyes, but human-shaped silhouettes that could move on rails, simulating walking targets at extreme distance. "We'll make this interesting," Rivera announced. "Moving targets, 5 shots. Hit 3, and I'll believe your previous shots weren't luck." "That's impossible," Jessica whispered to the soldier next to her. "At that distance, with moving targets, even calculating the lead time would require a computer," the soldier finished, "or a very specific kind of training that supposedly doesn't exist anymore." Emma was given the rifle again, but this time she did something different. She reached into her pocket and pulled out what looked like a small notebook. She flipped through it quickly, her trembling fingers finding a specific page, and studied it for exactly 3 seconds before putting it away. "What was that?" Mason demanded. My notes, sir," Emma stammered, "from basic training, about wind and distance." Mason snatched the notebook from her pocket before she could protest, flipping through it aggressively. But all he found were what appeared to be mundane administrative notes, grocery lists, and phone numbers. Nothing about shooting, nothing about wind tables or ballistic calculations. He threw it back at her in disgust. What Mason hadn't noticed, what only someone specifically looking for it would have seen, was that the grocery lists weren't random. The items, their quantities, their prices, formed a complex code that, when properly deciphered, contained detailed ballistic data for dozens of different scenarios. It was the kind of thing that would take years to memorize, years to perfect, and it was hidden in plain sight as the mundane scribblings of a clerk. The base's comprehensive liability coverage system hummed quietly in the background, its automated sensors recording every detail of what was about to unfold. The military insurance protocols, managed by defense contractors with billions in coverage for training accidents, would later flag this entire incident for review. The complex legal framework that protected both instructors and trainees required extensive documentation of any anomalous events, policies that cost millions annually but would prove invaluable when investigations into what really happened this morning arose. Every shot, every word, every gesture was being recorded from multiple angles, creating a record that would later be pored over by investigators trying to understand how everyone had missed what was right in front of them. Emma took her position for what everyone assumed would be her inevitable failure. The moving targets began their slow traverse across the 2,100-yard range, their movement pattern randomized by computer to prevent prediction. At that distance, they were barely visible to the naked eye, just specks moving against the desert backdrop. She settled into her shooting position, but this time it was different. This time, there was no attempt to hide what she was doing. Her breathing pattern was obvious, mechanical in its precision. Her trembling hands found a rhythm, using the shake itself as a timing mechanism. She was computing wind speed, distance, target velocity, bullet drop, even the Coriolis effect from the Earth's rotation, all in real time, all in her head. "This is insane," Brooks muttered. "She's going to humiliate herself." Emma fired. 1.9 seconds later, the first target registered a hit. Center mass. She didn't wait for confirmation, didn't even look through the scope to see if she'd hit. She was already adjusting, already calculating for the second target. The rifle cracked again. Another hit. By the third shot, even Mason had stopped trying to rationalize what he was seeing. By the fourth, several soldiers had actually stepped backward, as if Emma had transformed into something dangerous right in front of them. The fifth shot was fired, before the fourth had even reached its target. 5 shots, 5 hits, 5 perfect center mass strikes on moving targets at 2,100 yards, with a damaged rifle in 40-mile-per-hour winds. The electronic scoring system confirmed what everyone's eyes refused to believe. The base record hadn't just been matched, it had been exceeded. The previous record holder had taken 12 shots to hit 5 targets. Emma had done it with 5. "That's not possible," Mason said, but his voice had gone hollow, empty of its earlier bravado. "That's not humanly possible." Rivera's phone rang. He answered it, listened for 30 seconds, then went very, very pale. He ended the call and immediately started barking orders. "Clear the range. Everyone back. Thompson, don't move." But his orders came too late. Mason, driven by a combination of humiliation, fear, and rage, had already started moving. He charged toward Emma, his hand reaching for her collar. "What are you?" he snarled. "What kind of freak are you?" He grabbed her shirt, yanking hard, trying to pull her to her feet. The fabric, already worn and stressed, gave way with a loud ripping sound. The gray t-shirt tore from the collar down to the middle of her back, and suddenly, everything stopped. The tattoo was massive, covering most of Emma's back from her shoulder blades down to her lower spine. But this wasn't the typical military tattoo, not the eagles and flags and unit insignias that decorated the backs of half the soldiers on base. This was something else entirely. The central figure was an angel, but not the benevolent guardian angel of religious imagery. This was an angel of death, a warrior of heaven with features that were both beautiful and terrible. Its wings spread from Emma's left shoulder to her right, each feather rendered in such exquisite detail that they seemed to ripple with her breathing. The wings were black, not the black of ink, but the black of a void, as if they absorbed light rather than reflected it. In the angel's hands was a sword, pointed downward, the blade passing through a human heart that dripped stylized blood. Around the heart were 7 stars, each one containing a tiny initial that only someone looking closely could read. The detail was incredible. Every link in the angel's armor, every feather in its wings, had been rendered with obsessive precision, but it was the text that made everyone freeze. Above the angel, in Gothic script that seemed to burn itself into the retinas of anyone who looked at it, were the words "Mortem ex caelo," death from heaven. And below, in smaller but no less imposing text, "Archangel Unit." And beneath that, "Nunquam oblitus," never forgotten. The silence that fell over the range was absolute. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if nature itself recognized the significance of what had just been revealed. Master Sergeant Davis was the first to speak, his voice barely a whisper that somehow carried across the entire range. "Archangel Unit." Those 2 words rippled through the crowd like an electric shock. Phones that had been recording dropped from nerveless fingers. Soldiers who had been laughing moments before took involuntary steps backward. Even Brooks, aggressive Brooks, who feared nothing and no one, found himself backing away from Emma. Because everyone there, everyone who had served more than a single tour, had heard of Archangel Unit. They were legend, myth, ghost stories told in phobies and combat outposts. 7 operators who officially didn't exist, who took missions that were so classified they didn't even have code names. They were the ones called when Delta Force said it was impossible, when SEAL Team 6 said it was suicide. And they were all dead. Killed 3 years ago in Operation Phantom Desert, an operation so classified that even mentioning its name in the wrong company could end a military career. The official report, the one that exactly 7 people in the entire Department of Defense had access to, listed all 7 archangels as KIA. No bodies recovered, no survivors. Yet here stood Emma Thompson, administrative clerk with trembling hands, with the Archangel Unit tattoo covering her back and 7 stars that everyone now realized represented 7 ghosts. Captain Rivera's phone rang again. He answered with a hand that shook worse than Emma's ever had. "Yes, sir. Yes, sir. She's here. Yes, sir. I understand. Immediately, sir." He lowered the phone and turned to address the crowd, but before he could speak, the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors became audible. Not the standard Blackhawks that usually flew over Fort Bragg, but something heavier, more powerful. The sound grew louder, and then a shadow passed over the range as a military helicopter descended toward the designated landing zone. Emma still hadn't moved. She stood there, her torn shirt hanging off her shoulders, the tattoo fully exposed to 200 pairs of disbelieving eyes. Her hands had stopped trembling completely, and when she finally turned to face the crowd, her expression had changed entirely. Gone was the frightened clerk. In her place stood someone else, someone whose eyes held the weight of deaths witnessed and deaths delivered. "I came here," she said, her voice no longer weak or trembling, but carrying the kind of authority that made even senior NCOs straighten unconsciously, "to find out who killed my team." Mason's legs gave out. He dropped to his knees in the dirt, his face white as paper. You're dead. The report said you were all dead." "Reports can be wrong," Emma replied, "or they can be deliberately falsified to protect ongoing operations." Or, her gaze swept across the assembled soldiers, stopping on 3 specific faces. "They can be lies told to cover up murder." The helicopter touched down, and the door slid open. Out stepped Colonel Harrison, a man whose very presence commanded immediate attention. His uniform bore the insignia of Special Operations Command, and his chest carried ribbons that most of the soldiers present couldn't even identify. But it was the expression on his face, a mixture of relief, awe, and fear, that made everyone understand that something monumentally significant was happening. Harrison crossed the distance to Emma in quick strides, and then, in full view of everyone present, this full-bird colonel snapped to attention and rendered a perfect salute. "Sergeant Major Williams," he said, his voice carrying across the silent range. "Archangel 7. I'd been told you were killed in action along with the rest of your unit." Emma, or Williams, as she apparently really was, returned the salute with precision that made her previous trembling seem like an impossibility. "The reports of my death were strategically advantageous, sir. It allowed me to investigate without interference." "Investigate what, Sergeant Major?" Emma's eyes found Captain Rivera, who had gone very still. "The leak that led to my unit's ambush. The sale of classified intelligence that resulted in 6 of the finest operators this country has ever produced being slaughtered like sheep." Her voice had gone cold, lethal. "The betrayal that came from inside this very base." Lieutenant Brooks made a sound that might have been a whimper. He started backing away, but Emma's voice stopped him cold. "Don't run, Brooks. There's nowhere to go. I've had 3 years to plan this. 3 years to place myself exactly where I needed to be. 3 years to gather evidence." She pulled a small device from her pocket, what everyone had assumed was just a phone, but was actually a military-grade encrypted recording device. "Every conversation, every meeting, every treasonous word you've spoken in my presence thinking I was just furniture, just a trembling clerk nobody noticed." Brooks tried to run then, but he didn't make it 3 steps before soldiers who moments ago had been his friends tackled him to the ground. The transformation in the crowd was complete. They'd gone from mocking Emma to being ready to tear Brooks apart with their bare hands. This is it, the moment everything changes. If you're on the edge of your seat, hit that like button and share this with someone who needs to see what real strength looks like. The reveal coming up will leave you speechless. Are you ready for the truth about Emma? Let me know in the comments. Rivera tried to maintain his composure, tried to act confused, offended even. "Sergeant Major Williams, I don't know what you think you've discovered, but I assure you—" "Save it, Captain," Emma interrupted. "Or should I say Agent Rivera? Yes, I know about your other employer, the one that pays you significantly more than the United States Army, the one that wanted Archangel Unit eliminated because we were getting too close to exposing their operations." She reached into her pocket again, pulling out a small leather notebook. But this wasn't the prop Mason had searched earlier. This was different, older, worn from years of handling. She opened it and began reading. August 15, 2021, 0300 hours. Captain Rivera meets with unknown foreign national at off-base location. Money changes hands. August 22nd, Archangel Unit's deployment schedule leaked to hostile forces. September 3rd, Operation Phantom Desert compromised. 6 Archangels killed in ambush that was waiting exactly where our classified route indicated we would be. Each date, each time, each detail she recited hit like a physical blow. Soldiers near Rivera backed away, creating an expanding circle around him as if his treason was contagious. "You have no proof," Rivera said, but his voice had lost its commanding tone. "Don't I?" Emma smiled, and it was the kind of smile that belonged on the angel tattooed on her back, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. "Brooks here has been very talkative. Amazing what people will say in front of someone they think is nobody, and when they're drunk, and when they think their communications are encrypted." She held up the device again. "Military-grade quantum encryption breaker. Borrowed from some friends at NSA. Every text, every email, every supposedly secure communication you've sent in the last 3 years, I have it all." Colonel Harrison pulled out his own phone, speaking rapidly. Within seconds, sirens became audible in the distance, growing louder as military police vehicles raced toward the range. But Emma wasn't done. She turned to Mason, who was still on his knees, tears now streaming down his face. "You," she said, and her voice softened slightly. "You were just a useful idiot, too proud, too arrogant to realize you were being used. Brooks and Rivera knew that if they put you in charge of hazing new arrivals, you'd create enough chaos that nobody would notice what they were really doing." Mason's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, his entire worldview crashing down around him. The military police vehicles screeched to a halt at the range entrance, and armed MPs poured out, immediately moving to secure Rivera and Brooks. Rivera tried to maintain his dignity, tried to walk with his head high, but Brooks broke completely. He fell to his knees, sobbing, begging, claiming it wasn't his fault, that he'd been forced, that his family had been threatened. "Save it for the tribunal," Colonel Harrison said coldly, "though I doubt it will help. Treason resulting in the deaths of American service members carries only one penalty." As they were led away, Emma turned back to the assembled crowd. 200 soldiers stood in absolute silence, many with tears in their eyes, all looking at her with a mixture of awe, respect, and not a small amount of fear. "Let me tell you about my unit," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the morning air. 6 of the finest people I've ever known. Reynolds, who had 3 kids and a wife in Texas. Baker, who was 2 months from retirement. Chen, no relation to any of you here, who'd just gotten engaged. Wilson, who spent his off time building schools in Africa. Park, barely 22, a genius with explosives and terrible jokes. And Rodriguez, again, common name, no relation, who saved my life 17 times in 12 deployments. She paused, her eyes distant, seeing ghosts that only she could see. They died because someone in this uniform, someone who swore the same oath we all did, decided money was worth more than honor. They died believing they were serving their country, never knowing they'd been sold out by one of their own. Private Jessica Martinez raised a trembling hand. How did you survive, Sergeant Major?" Emma's smile was bitter. "I almost didn't. Took 17 rounds, enough shrapnel to set off metal detectors for the rest of my life, and nerve damage that means my hands will never stop shaking." She held up her trembling hands, and everyone understood now that it wasn't fear or weakness causing the tremors. It was the price she'd paid for survival. "But I lived, and I made a promise to 6 ghosts that I would find out who killed them. That promise brought me here, to this place, to this moment." Colonel Harrison stepped forward. "Sergeant Major Williams, there are people who need to debrief you. High-level people. There's a car waiting." "No." The single word stopped Harrison mid-sentence. "Sir?" he asked, confused. "I'm done, Colonel. I've completed my mission. My unit's killers have been exposed. The evidence has been turned over to the proper authorities." Emma pulled something from her pocket, her military ID, and handed it to Harrison. "Emma Williams died 3 years ago with her unit. Emma Thompson, the administrative clerk, never really existed. So, who am I now?" Harrison looked at the ID, then back at her. "You're a hero, Sergeant Major. I'm nobody," Emma interrupted. "And that's how I want it to stay." She turned and began walking away, her torn shirt fluttering in the wind, the massive angel tattoo visible with every step. The crowd parted before her like the Red Sea, 200 soldiers moving aside to create a path. "Wait!" Harrison called after her. "There's going to be a ceremony. Medals, recognition." Emma paused but didn't turn around. "Give them to the families of the 6 who didn't come home. They're the ones who deserve recognition. But your career, your pension, everything you've earned." Now she did turn, just enough for them to see her profile. "I earned the right to walk away, Colonel. I earned the right to disappear. And that's exactly what I'm going to do." Master Sergeant Davis stepped forward. "Ma'am, if I may ask, the shooting. How did you make those shots with the tremors?" Emma actually smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. "You adapt, Sergeant. You learn to work with what you have instead of mourning what you lost. The tremor follows a pattern, 4.2 seconds between major shakes, with minor tremors at predictable intervals. Once you understand the pattern, you can time your shots accordingly. It took me 2 years to master it. 2 years of firing 10,000 rounds despite hands that wouldn't stop shaking." She looked at the assembled soldiers one more time. "Remember this day, not because of me, but because of what it represents. The people you mock, the ones you dismiss, the ones you think are beneath you. Any one of them could be carrying secrets that would humble you. Any one of them could be a hero in hiding, a warrior in waiting." Her gaze found Mason, still kneeling in the dirt. "And you, Sergeant Mason, you're not evil, just weak, easily led, easily used. But weakness can be overcome. You can choose to be better. The question is whether you will." Mason looked up at her, his face streaked with tears and dirt. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." "Don't apologize to me," Emma replied. "Apologize to every person you've bullied, every soldier you've hazed, every human being you've treated as less than. And then do better. Be better. That's the only apology that matters." A phone rang, cutting through the moment. Not a normal ringtone, but a specific sound that made Colonel Harrison immediately reach for his secure satellite phone. He answered, listened for a moment, then held it out toward Emma. "It's for you," he said, his expression unreadable. Emma looked at the phone like it was a venomous snake. "I told you, I'm done." It's not what you think," Harrison said carefully. "Please, just take it." With obvious reluctance, Emma accepted the phone. "Yes?" She listened for 30 seconds, her expression cycling through surprise, disbelief, and finally something that might have been hope. "You're certain? Moscow? 72 hours. She ended the call and handed the phone back to Harrison, her hands trembling worse than ever, but this time it wasn't from nerve damage. "What is it?" Harrison asked. Emma looked at him, then at the crowd, then at the sky where the helicopter still waited. "Archangel 1, he's alive." The words hit like a thunderbolt. Archangel 1 had been the unit's commander, the legendary operator whose name was classified above even Harrison's clearance level. If he was alive, it could be a trap, Harrison warned. "It could be," Emma agreed. "Or it could be the truth. Either way, I have to know." She started walking again, but this time with purpose, with direction. The trembling clerk was gone completely now, replaced by something else. A warrior with one more mission to complete. As she reached the edge of the range, Private Jessica Martinez called out, "Will we see you again?" Emma paused one last time. "No, Emma Thompson is gone. Emma Williams is dead. And whoever I become next, that's nobody's business but mine." Then she was gone, walking into the morning sun, leaving 200 soldiers standing in stunned silence on a rifle range where the impossible had just become reality, where a trembling clerk had revealed herself as an angel of death, and where the truth about betrayal and honor had been written in bullets and blood. The story would spread, of course. Within hours, every soldier on Fort Bragg would hear some version of what had happened. Within days, it would reach every military base in the country. The details would change with each telling. The distance of the shots would grow. The number of targets would multiply. The tattoo would become even more elaborate, but the core truth would remain. That strength isn't always obvious, that heroes don't always wear their medals where others can see them, and that sometimes the person you mock might be the one who paid the highest price for your freedom. But for those who were there, who saw it with their own eyes, the truth was both simpler and more profound. They had witnessed resurrection, not of the body, but of the spirit. They had seen someone thought dead return to claim justice. They had watched an angel spread her broken wings and prove she could still fly. The range was quiet now, the morning's qualifications forgotten. Equipment sat abandoned. Phones lay where they had been dropped. And in the dirt near Lane 15, the torn remnants of a gray t-shirt fluttered in the wind like a flag of surrender, or perhaps, more accurately, like a declaration of victory. The aftermath of Emma's revelation rippled through Fort Bragg like shockwaves from a detonation. Within minutes of her departure, the range had transformed into a crime scene. Military police cordoned off the area with yellow tape. Evidence technicians photographed every shell casing, every footprint, every torn piece of gray fabric that had once been part of Emma Thompson's disguise. The 200 witnesses found themselves detained for questioning, their phones temporarily confiscated to prevent sensitive information from leaking before official channels could control the narrative. But damage control was impossible. Too many people had seen too much. Videos had already been uploaded to private clouds before the MPs arrived. Encrypted messages were flying between soldiers and their contacts at other bases. The story was out, spreading through military networks faster than any official communication could hope to contain it. In the base commander's office, an emergency meeting convened within the hour. General Patricia Morrison, a woman who'd earned her stars in Iraq and Afghanistan, sat at the head of a conference table, surrounded by grim-faced officers. The large screen on the wall displayed Emma's service record, or rather, the lack of one. Where Emma Thompson's file should have contained 5 years of administrative work, there were only carefully crafted fabrications, social security numbers that led nowhere, previous assignments that never existed, recommendations from officers who had never heard of her. How? General Morrison's single word carried the weight of absolute command. How did someone with this level of deception get onto my base? Colonel Harrison, who'd been helicoptered in specifically for this meeting, cleared his throat. With respect, General, she didn't get on to your base. She was placed here by intelligence services operating at classification levels above even your clearance. Morrison's eyes narrowed dangerously. Are you telling me that CIA or NSA or some alphabet agency I've never heard of used my base as a hunting ground without my knowledge? I'm telling you, Harrison said carefully, that Archangel Unit operated under special authorities that transcended normal military command structure. When they were reported KIA 3 years ago, those authorities should have been dissolved. The fact that Sergeant Major Williams, Emma, was able to maintain her cover suggests someone very high up wanted her to complete this mission. On the screen, Emma's real service record finally appeared, delivered by secure courier from a Pentagon vault that required 3 separate authentication keys to access. The assembled officers read in stunned silence. Sergeant Major Emma Williams, call sign Angel 7, 143 confirmed kills, 27 solo operations, 15 presidential commendations that would never be made public. Fluent in 7 languages, expert in 23 weapons systems, qualified in everything from halo jumps to submarine infiltration. Her psychological evaluation scores were off the charts. Intelligence that bordered on genius level, combined with physical capabilities that should have been impossible given her size and, now, her nerve damage. Look at this, Major Peterson pointed to a section of the record. Operation Blackwater, Yemen, 2019. Single-handedly eliminated a terrorist cell that had been planning attacks on 3 embassies. Operation Stone Garden, Syria, 2020. Extracted a compromised CIA asset from a facility everyone said was impenetrable. This woman was, one of the most lethal human beings our military ever produced. And now she's gone, Morrison said flatly. Vanished like smoke after exposing 2 traitors on my base. She turned to her intelligence officer. Captain Torres, what have we learned from Brooks and Rivera? Torres looked uncomfortable. Brooks broke immediately, General. Full confession. He's been feeding information to foreign buyers for 2 years, using his position to photograph classified documents during training exercises. Bank records show deposits totaling over $3 million in offshore accounts. And Rivera? Rivera's different. He's not talking, demanding a lawyer, claiming everything Emma said was fabrication, but Torres hesitated, then pulled up another document on the screen. We found this hidden in his quarters. It was a photograph, grainy but clear enough. 7 operators in tactical gear, faces obscured by balaclavas except for their eyes. The photo was dated 3 days before Operation Phantom Desert. Someone had drawn red X's through 6 of the faces. The 7th, identifiable by those distinctive gray eyes, had a question mark. He knew she survived, Harrison breathed. He's known for 3 years. Meanwhile, In the base medical facility, Master Sergeant Davis was undergoing examination for shock. His hands shook, not with nerve damage like Emma's, but with the aftermath of realization. He'd been running that range for 15 years. He'd seen Emma Thompson dozens of times over the past 3 years, watched her deliver reports, observed her walking across base with that nervous, timid gait. Never once had he suspected. She was there the whole time, he told the psychiatrist evaluating him. 3 years, hiding in plain sight. Do you understand what level of discipline that takes? To maintain a cover identity every single day, to never slip, never reveal even a hint of who you really were. The psychiatrist, Major Linda Crawford, nodded while taking notes. She'd been called in specifically to evaluate everyone who'd had close contact with Emma, to assess the psychological impact of discovering that someone they'd dismissed as worthless was actually one of America's most elite warriors. What disturbs you most about the revelation, Sergeant Davis? Davis laughed bitterly. What disturbs me? That I pride myself on being observant, on reading people, and I completely missed it. Or maybe that we all participated in tormenting someone who'd sacrificed more for this country than any of us could imagine. Mason physically pushed her, mocked her, called her dead weight. Brooks deliberately sabotaged her equipment, and she just took it, endured it, because her mission was more important than her pride. Across base in a detention cell, Sergeant Mason sat with his head in his hands. He hadn't spoken since Emma had walked away, hadn't moved except when forced to by the MPs. The proud, arrogant soldier who'd started the morning, believing himself superior to everyone around him, had been shattered completely. His guard, a young private named Williams, no relation to Emma, watched him with a mixture of pity and disgust. You really didn't know, Sergeant? Mason looked up, his eyes red and swollen. No? How could I know? She played the part perfectly. The trembling, the fear, the way she could barely hold those personnel files. It was all an act, and I fell for it completely. He laughed, but it sounded more like a sob. I pushed around a woman who could have killed me with her pinky finger. I called her weak when she was stronger than I'll ever be. The colonel says you're not being charged with anything, Williams offered. You were just a jerk, not a traitor. Just a jerk, Mason repeated hollowly. Is that supposed to make me feel better? That I wasn't evil, just stupid and cruel? In another part of the detention facility, Lieutenant Brooks had stopped crying and started calculating. His lawyer, a slick civilian attorney who'd materialized within an hour of his arrest, was already working angles, looking for deals. Brooks knew he was facing life in prison at best, execution at worst. Treason during wartime, resulting in the deaths of American service members, carried the ultimate penalty. But Brooks had information, names, dates, account numbers. Maybe, just maybe, he could trade his way to a lighter sentence. She knew, he told his lawyer. Emma, or Williams, or whatever her real name is. She knew from the beginning. Every conversation we had, every time Rivera and I discussed our plans thinking she was just furniture in the room, she was recording. She has everything. The lawyer frowned. How much is everything? 3 years of evidence. Every contact with foreign buyers, every document we sold, every operation we compromised. Brooks slumped in his chair. She played the long game, let us incriminate ourselves over and over while she built an airtight case. Captain Rivera, in solitary confinement, maintained his silence. Unlike Brooks, he understood that talking would only make things worse. He'd been trained to resist interrogation, to compartmentalize information, to protect the larger network, even if it meant sacrificing himself. Because Rivera knew something that Brooks didn't, something that even Emma might not have discovered. The conspiracy went much deeper than just 2 corrupt soldiers selling information. Rivera thought about the phone call he'd received 3 years ago, the voice that had offered him more money than he'd see in 10 lifetimes of military service. All he had to do was provide some information, coordinate some timings, ensure certain people were in certain places at certain times. He hadn't pulled the trigger on Archangel Unit. That had been done by others, professionals hired specifically for the job. But he'd provided the when and where that made it possible. The thing that haunted him now, sitting in his cell, wasn't guilt over the 6 dead operators. Rivera had long ago made peace with being a traitor. What haunted him was Emma's survival, her patience, her methodical destruction of everything he'd built. She'd turned his own tactics against him, used his arrogance as a weapon, allowed his contempt for a mere clerk to blind him to the predator in his midst. Back on the range, investigation teams were discovering more evidence of Emma's true identity. hidden in various locations, behind lockers, under benches, inside equipment boxes. They found small surveillance devices, not standard military equipment, but sophisticated NSA-level technology that had been recording everything for 3 years. Every conversation, every meeting, every whispered conspiracy had been captured and transmitted to secure servers whose locations were known only to Emma. Colonel Harrison pulled up Emma's classified file on his encrypted tablet. The database contained records from specialized sniper schools, psychological evaluations, and mission reports that read like thriller novels. But one section stood out: her training at the legendary Site J, a facility that officially didn't exist, where operators learned skills that went far beyond standard military doctrine. She spent 18 months there, Harrison told General Morrison during a secure video conference. 18 months learning everything from deep cover infiltration to advanced psychological manipulation. They taught her how to become invisible, how to make people see what they expected to see rather than what was actually there. Morrison studied the file with growing unease. This kind of training, these skills, we're not talking about a soldier anymore. We're talking about something else. Something we created but maybe can't control. She's not our problem anymore, Harrison replied. She made that clear. Emma Williams is dead, Emma Thompson never existed, and whoever she becomes next is outside our jurisdiction. Unless she decides we're the enemy, Morrison pointed out. A person with her skills, her training, her justified anger at how the system failed her unit, she could do immense damage if she chose to. Harrison shook his head. You don't understand her psychology, General. I've studied every report, every evaluation. Emma Williams is driven by honor, by duty, by the need to protect those who can't protect themselves. She came here for justice, not revenge. There's a difference. Is there? When you've lost everything, when the system you served betrayed you, when you've spent 3 years living a lie to catch the people responsible, how do you not cross that line? Because, Harrison said simply, she's better than we are. If Emma's transformation from victim to victor gave you chills, subscribe for more jaw-dropping military stories. Next video reveals how a homeless veteran saved an entire mall from disaster. Don't miss it. Click the video on your screen now. Which moment shocked you most? Comment below. As afternoon turned to evening, the consequences of the morning's revelations continued to cascade through military channels. At the Pentagon, emergency meetings convened in rooms that didn't appear on any building schematics. Men and women, whose names would never appear in any public record, discussed damage control, discussed implications, discussed the terrifying possibility that if one archangel had survived, perhaps others had too. The official story was already being crafted. There would be no mention of Emma Williams or Archangel Unit. Brooks and Rivera would be charged with more mundane crimes, selling military supplies, conduct unbecoming, anything that wouldn't require revealing classified operations. The 200 witnesses at Fort Bragg would be debriefed, would sign non-disclosure agreements, would be reminded that discussing classified events carried severe penalties. But stories have a way of escaping containment. In barracks across Fort Bragg, soldiers whispered about what they'd seen. In officers' clubs, majors and colonels discussed the implications over bourbon. In online forums, accessible only to those with military credentials, theories proliferated about Archangel Unit, about Operation Phantom Desert, about what other secrets might be hiding behind administrative desks and supply room counters. Private Jessica Martinez sat in her barracks room, staring at the challenge coin Emma had dropped, perhaps deliberately, as she'd walked away. It was unlike any military coin Jessica had ever seen. One side bore the image of an angel with black wings, similar to Emma's tattoo. The other side had 7 stars arranged in a pattern that, when Jessica looked closer, formed the constellation Perseus, the hero who slayed monsters. Around the edge were words in Latin, Mortuae vivos docent, the dead teach the living. Jessica turned the coin over and over in her fingers, thinking about the morning's events. She'd been one of the few to show Emma kindness, offering water when everyone else offered mockery. It had been a small gesture, insignificant really, but Emma had remembered. In those final moments, when Emma had looked across the crowd, her eyes had found Jessica's, and there had been a slight nod of acknowledgement. A knock on her door interrupted Jessica's thoughts. She opened it to find Colonel Harrison standing in the hallway, his expression unreadable. "Private Martinez, I need to speak with you." Jessica's heart rate spiked. "Yes, sir. Have I done something wrong?" On the contrary, you showed compassion when others showed cruelty. That's been noted. Harrison entered the small room, his eyes immediately finding the challenge coin in Jessica's hand. She gave that to you? She dropped it, sir. I picked it up after she left. Harrison smiled slightly. Emma Williams never dropped anything accidentally in her life. If you have that coin, she wanted you to have it. Why, sir? Because she saw something in you, the same thing that made you offer water to someone everyone else was mocking. Harrison pulled out a business card, plain white with only a phone number. If you're interested, Private, there are programs looking for soldiers with your instincts, programs that value compassion as much as combat skills. Jessica took the card, understanding that she was being offered something significant even if she didn't fully grasp what. Is this related to Archangel Unit, sir? Archangel Unit is gone, Private, but the need for warriors who can think, who can observe, who can show mercy as easily as force, that need continues. Harrison turned to leave, then paused. That coin is your ticket, Martinez. When you're ready, call that number and show them the coin. They'll know what it means. After Harrison left, Jessica sat on her bunk, weighing the coin and the card, understanding that her life had just taken an unexpected turn. The morning had started with routine qualification drills and ended with her being recruited for something beyond her current understanding. In the base stockade, Mason received an unexpected visitor. Davis stood outside his cell, looking older than his years, carrying a folder of papers. Sergeant Davis, why are you here? Davis studied Mason through the bars. Because someone needs to tell you the truth about what you've done, not the surface truth, that you bullied someone who turned out to be a hero, the deeper truth, which is that you were selected, Sergeant Mason, specifically chosen by Brooks and Rivera because of your personality profile, your arrogance, your need to dominate, your inability to see past surface appearances. It all made you perfect for their needs. Mason's face flushed with anger. So what? I was just a tool? Yes, Davis said bluntly. A tool they used to create chaos, to distract from their real activities. Every time you hazed a new arrival, every time you caused a scene, you gave them cover to conduct their treason. He passed the folder through the bars. This is your psychological evaluation from 3 years ago, right before Brooks became your lieutenant. Look at the notes. Mason opened the folder with trembling hands. There, in Brooks's handwriting, were annotations. Perfect subject for manipulation, ego-driven, lacks critical thinking, responds predictably to challenges to authority. Recommend positioning as useful distraction. They played you, Davis continued, just like Emma played them. The only difference is, she played them to expose treason and avenge fallen comrades. They played you for money. Mason crumpled the paper in his fist. So, I'm not even worth being a proper villain? I'm just an idiot? You're a soldier who forgot what that means, Davis repeated. The question now is whether you remember or whether you let this break you completely. As night fell over Fort Bragg, the base that had started the day with routine operations found itself at the center of the largest internal investigation in military history. Every person who had had contact with Brooks or Rivera was being questioned. Every document they'd handled was being reviewed. Every operation they'd been involved with was being re-examined for potential compromise. But the biggest shock was yet to come. At 2100 hours, as investigators were preparing to wrap up for the night, 5 figures appeared at the main gate. They wore civilian clothes, jeans, t-shirts, baseball caps, but they moved with the unmistakable precision of trained operators. They presented IDs to the gate guard, who went pale and immediately called for his supervisor. Within minutes, General Morrison herself was at the gate, staring at 5 people who shouldn't exist. Archangels 2 through 6, the lead figure said simply. He was a tall black man with scars covering the left side of his face. We're here to collect our 7th. Morrison's mouth opened and closed several times before she managed. You're all supposed to be dead. We were, the woman beside him replied. She was Asian, small like Emma, with eyes that seemed to see everything at once. Death was our cover, just like Emma's administrative role was hers. We've been hunting the network that killed our unit. Or rather, the unit we were supposedly part of. Morrison's confusion was evident. I don't understand. The scarred man, Archangel 2, smiled coldly. The 7 operators killed in Operation Phantom Desert were real Archangels, yes, but they weren't us. We were the backup unit, the shadows behind the shadows. When the primary unit was eliminated, we disappeared, let the enemy think they'd succeeded, and began hunting. For 3 years? For 3 years, confirmed Archangel 3, a Hispanic man whose calm demeanor belied the danger he radiated. Emma took the inside approach, becoming invisible through weakness. We took the outside approach, tracking financial networks, identifying buyers, eliminating threats. Eliminating? Morrison's voice sharpened. On whose authority? Presidential Finding 77 Alpha, Archangel 2 replied. Signed 3 years ago, authorizing any and all actions necessary to identify and neutralize the network responsible for Operation Phantom Desert. Morrison pulled out her secure phone, made a quick call to verify. When she lowered it, her expression had changed from skepticism to something approaching fear. It's real. You have carte blanche. Had, Archangel 4 corrected. She was blonde, tall, with a southern accent that sounded almost musical. Our mission ends tonight. Rivera and Brooks were the last pieces of the puzzle we needed. Emma delivered them, so we're done. Where is she? Archangel 5 asked. He was Middle Eastern in appearance, with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. Emma, where did she go? She left this morning, Morrison replied. Said Emma Williams was dead. Emma Thompson never existed. She just walked away. The 5 archangels exchanged glances, an entire conversation happening without words. Moscow, Archangel 6 said suddenly. He was the youngest looking, perhaps late 20s, with red hair and freckles that made him appear almost innocent until you noticed the way he carried himself. The constant state of readiness. She got the call about 1. One's dead, Morrison insisted. The report was clear. The report was wrong, Archangel 2 interrupted. Deliberately wrong, crafted by us to protect ongoing operations. Archangel 1, our real commander, has been deep undercover in the Russian arms network. He's the one who's been feeding us intelligence, helping us track the money, identifying the players. And now? Now his cover's blown. The arrest of Rivera and Brooks triggered fail-safes we didn't know about. Messages were sent, warnings delivered. One has less than 72 hours before they figure out who he really is. Morrison felt like the world was tilting. So, Emma's gone to extract him? Emma's gone to try, Archangel 3 corrected. Moscow in winter, alone, with nerve damage that makes precision shooting nearly impossible, against an entire network of arms dealers who now know Archangel Unit exists? It's suicide. Then why let her go? The 5 archangels shared another look, this one tinged with something that might have been sadness. Because, Archangel 2 said softly, she's the only one would trust. After what happened, after thinking we were all dead, after 3 years of isolation, he won't come in for anyone else. It has to be her. Even if it kills her? Especially if it kills her, Archangel 4 replied. That's who we are. That's what we do. We complete the mission, whatever the cost. General Morrison studied the 5 warriors standing at her gate. What do you need from me? Nothing, Archangel 2 replied. We're not here officially. We were never here. We just needed to confirm Emma had received the message and understood the situation. And now we disappear again, back to being ghosts, back to being dead. He turned to leave, then paused. General, what happened here today, Emma's revelation, the arrest of the traitors, it's just the tip of the iceberg. The network that targeted us, it's vast, it's connected, and it's not going to stop just because a couple of soldiers got arrested. Are you saying there are more traitors on my base? I'm saying, Archangel 2 replied carefully, that you should look very carefully at anyone who's risen to power in the last 3 years. Anyone who's had sudden financial windfalls. Anyone who's had too much success in operations that should have failed. With that, the 5 archangels turned and walked back into the darkness. By the time Morrison thought to have them followed, they'd vanished completely, as if they'd never been there at all. In his cell, Rivera had finally received the news he'd been dreading. His lawyer, not the public defender he'd requested, but a high-powered attorney he'd never seen before, delivered it in clipped, professional tones. Your employers send their regards, the lawyer said, placing a small pill on the table between them. They also send their disappointment and their solution. Rivera stared at the pill, small, white, innocuous looking. They want you to protect the network. Your sacrifice ensures the survival of the organization. Your family will be well compensated. And if I refuse, the lawyer's smile was cold. Your family won't be compensated. In fact, Your family will cease to exist within 48 hours of your refusal. Your choice, Captain. Rivera picked up the pill, rolled it between his fingers. 3 years of betrayal, of selling out his brothers and sisters in arms, had led to this moment. A small white pill and a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. Tell them, he said finally, that Archangel 7 knows everything. Names, dates, account numbers. This pill won't protect anything. She knows what you knew, the lawyer corrected. You were middle management, Captain. Expendable. The real players, the ones who matter, remain protected. Rivera laughed bitterly. You don't understand what you're dealing with. Emma Williams isn't just a soldier. She's something else. Something you people created but can't control. She'll keep coming, even with nerve damage, even alone, even against impossible odds. She'll keep coming until she finds every last one of you. Perhaps, but she'll have to find us first. And we've been hiding much longer than she's been hunting. The lawyer stood to leave, the pill still sitting on the table. You have 1 hour to decide, Captain. Choose wisely. After the lawyer left, Rivera sat alone in his cell, staring at the pill. He thought about Emma, about the way she'd endured 3 years of mockery and abuse to get to this moment. He thought about the 6 dead archangels, about the betrayal that had led to their deaths. He thought about his family, innocent of his crimes, but about to pay for them anyway. In the end, the choice was simple. Rivera palmed the pill, brought it to his mouth, and swallowed. Within minutes, he was convulsing. Within 10, he was dead. The guards found him with foam on his lips and a note clutched in his hand. The dead teach the living. The same Latin phrase from Emma's challenge coin. The news of Rivera's suicide, though officials would never publicly call it that, reached the investigation team within the hour. Brooks, learning that his co-conspirator was dead, broke completely. He told them everything. Names, dates, amounts, methods. He drew organizational charts on the walls of his cell, desperate to trade information for protection. But even Brooks didn't know the full scope. He'd been a small player in a vast game, moving pieces without understanding the board. The real players, the ones Emma had called the network, remained shadows, protected by layers of deniability and distance. In a hotel room 60 miles from Fort Bragg, Emma Williams, now traveling under her 4th identity in as many hours, prepared for Moscow. She had ditched the torn gray t-shirt and worn pants, replacing them with clothes that would blend in with international travelers, dark jeans, a black sweater, a leather jacket that concealed various tools of her trade. Her hands shook as she loaded her equipment into a specially designed case that would pass through airport security without raising alarms. The tremors were worse when she was stressed, and the knowledge that Archangel 1, Michael, was alive and in danger had her nervous system firing on all cylinders. Michael. She hadn't let herself think his actual name in 3 years. He'd been more than just her commander. He'd been her mentor, her partner, and in those last months before Operation Phantom Desert, something more. Something that had never been allowed to fully develop because the mission always came first. The phone on the bed rang, not her regular phone, but the encrypted satellite phone she'd hidden in a storage unit for 3 years. Only 6 people in the world had this number, and 5 of them were supposed to be dead. 7. The voice on the other end was familiar, though distorted by encryption. 2? Emma's voice caught slightly. You're alive, yes, we all are, except the ones who actually died, of course. Archangel 2's voice carried a mixture of warmth and warning. We know about Moscow. We know about 1. Then you know I have to go. We know you think you have to go. There's a difference. Emma's hands tightened on the phone, her tremors momentarily stilling. He's in danger because of what I did. Rivera and Brooks's arrest triggered something. It triggered a cleanup protocol, 2 interrupted. Everyone who might be compromised is being eliminated. 1's cover is blown, but Emma, this is a trap. They know you'll come for him. They're counting on it. I know. And you're going anyway. Yes. There was a long pause, then 2 sighed. We can't officially help you. Our authorization doesn't extend to foreign operations. I know, but unofficially, check your door in 30 seconds. The line went dead. Emma counted down 30 seconds exactly, then opened her hotel room door. A package sat on the threshold, no delivery person in sight. Inside were things she desperately needed. A new passport with an identity so deep it would survive any scrutiny, credit cards linked to untraceable accounts, and most importantly, a single photograph. It showed Michael, Archangel 1, taken 3 weeks ago according to the timestamp. He was older, his hair gray now instead of black, lines carved into his face by 3 years of living a lie. But his eyes were the same, those intense brown eyes that had seen too much but somehow maintained their humanity. On the back of the photo were GPS coordinates and a single word, Keeper. Emma understood immediately. It was their old code, from missions when communications might be compromised. Keeper meant he was being held but still alive, still salvageable. She tucked the photo into her jacket, gathered her equipment, and headed for the door. As she left, she didn't notice the figure watching from the parking lot. Or rather, she noticed, but chose not to acknowledge them. Archangel 5, providing overwatch even though he wasn't supposed to be there. They were still a team, even if they could never admit it. The drive to the airport was uneventful, but Emma's mind was racing. Moscow in winter would be brutal. Her nerve damage was worse in cold weather, the tremors becoming almost uncontrollable when the temperature dropped below freezing. She'd be operating in a city where she didn't blend in, where every foreigner was automatically suspicious, where the arms dealers Michael had infiltrated had eyes everywhere. But she'd also be operating as someone they wouldn't expect. Not the trembling clerk, not the legendary sniper, but something in between. Someone damaged but dangerous, visible but overlooked. At the airport, she moved through security with the easy confidence of a frequent traveler. Her new identity, Sarah Mitchell, photographer for a nature magazine, was perfect. The camera equipment provided cover for the specialized gear hidden within, and photographers were expected to go to remote, dangerous places. As she waited at the gate, Emma noticed a familiar face. Private Jessica Martinez, in civilian clothes, sitting 3 rows away reading a book. Their eyes met briefly, and Jessica gave the smallest nod before returning to her reading. Whatever Colonel Harrison had offered her, she'd apparently accepted quickly. The flight to Moscow required 2 connections, giving Emma time to review what she knew. The coordinates 2 had provided led to an abandoned Soviet-era facility on the outskirts of Moscow, the kind of place where people disappeared and never returned. If Michael was being held there, extraction would be nearly impossible. One way in, multiple hostiles, no backup, and her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold a cup of coffee steady. Perfect. During her connection in Frankfurt, Emma received another message. This time it was from an unknown number, the text in Russian. The angel returns to heaven. It was confirmation. They knew she was coming. They were ready for her. Good. Let them be ready for Archangel 7, the legendary sniper. Let them prepare for a precision shooter who could kill from a mile away. They wouldn't be ready for what she'd actually become, someone who had learned to turn weakness into strength, to make trembling hands and damaged nerves into assets rather than liabilities. Colonel Harrison's encrypted tablet beeped with an urgent message as he sat in his temporary office at Fort Bragg. The investigation into Brooks and Rivera had expanded, pulling in resources from every intelligence agency in the government. What they were uncovering was staggering, a network of corruption that touched every branch of the military, every defense contractor, every intelligence service. But the message wasn't about the investigation, it was about Emma. Asset 7 spotted at Dulles Airport, boarding flight to Frankfurt, connection to Moscow, probable objective, Asset 1 extraction, request guidance. Harrison stared at the message for a long moment, then typed his reply. Asset 7 does not exist. No operational knowledge of described activities. Do not pursue or surveil. He then immediately sent a second message through a different channel, one that wouldn't appear in any official record. 7 heading to Moscow, probable trap. All available assets provide distant support, but do not intervene unless catastrophic failure imminent. The reply came back immediately. Understood. Ghosts don't exist, but sometimes they watch over angels. As Emma's plane lifted off from Frankfurt, beginning the final leg to Moscow, she thought about the morning's events at Fort Bragg. In less than 12 hours, she'd gone from being Emma Thompson, terrified administrative clerk, to being exposed as Archangel 7, to being nobody at all. 3 identities shed like old skin, each revealing something different underneath. But Moscow would require something new. Not the clerk, not the soldier, not the ghost. Something that was all of these and none of them. Something that could walk into a trap and turn it inside out. Her hands trembled as she held the photograph of Michael, studying his face, looking for clues about what 3 years undercover had done to him. Would he even remember their codes? Would he trust her after believing she was dead? Would he be the same man who'd held her hand in the helicopter before Operation Phantom Desert, promising they'd talk about after when the mission was done? There had never been an after. The mission had gone wrong. 6 archangels had died, or so everyone believed, and the survivors had scattered to the winds, becoming ghosts hunting ghosts. But maybe, just maybe, Moscow could be there after, even if it killed them both. The flight attendant offered her a drink, noting her shaking hands with professional sympathy. Nervous flyer? Emma smiled, accepting the water. Something like that. Well, you picked a tough time to visit Moscow. Winter storm coming in. They're saying it'll be the worst in a decade. Perfect, Emma murmured, and meant it. Bad weather meant reduced visibility, confused communications, chaos that could be exploited. Her trembling hands might be useless for precision shooting, but chaos? Chaos she could work with. As the plane flew east toward Moscow, toward Michael, toward what would likely be her last mission, Emma Williams allowed herself one moment of complete honesty. She was terrified. Not of dying, she'd made peace with that possibility years ago. She was terrified of failing, of letting Michael down the way she'd let down the 6 who died in the original Operation Phantom Desert. But fear, like trembling hands, could be a tool if you knew how to use it. Fear kept you sharp, kept you careful, kept you alive when confidence would get you killed. The sun was setting behind them, casting long shadows across the clouds below. Somewhere ahead, in a frozen city full of enemies, Michael was waiting. Waiting for rescue or waiting for death, she didn't know. But she'd find out. The angel was returning to heaven, even if heaven looked suspiciously like hell. As Moscow appeared on the horizon, a sprawling metropolis of lights against the gathering darkness, Emma Williams, Archangel 7, Ghost, Survivor, prepared for war. Not the kind fought with armies and air support, but the kind fought in shadows with damaged hands and unbreakable will. The trembling clerk from this morning was gone. In her place sat something far more dangerous. A warrior who'd learned that the greatest strength sometimes comes from embracing your greatest weakness. Moscow had no idea what was coming. Neither did the network that thought they'd set the perfect trap. Because Emma Williams didn't exist anymore, and things that don't exist can't be trapped, can't be predicted, can't be stopped. They can only bring death from heaven, like the angel tattooed on her back, like the promise she'd made to 6 graves and 1 living ghost. The plane began its descent into Moscow, into winter, into what would either be the end of everything or the beginning of something new. Emma's hands trembled as she prepared for landing, but for the first time in 3 years, she didn't try to hide it. The trembling was part of her now, and soon it would be part of Moscow's nightmare. The Moscow winter hit her the moment she stepped off the plane. Minus 23 degrees Celsius, with a wind that cut through her leather jacket like it was paper. Her hands immediately began shaking worse, the cold attacking her damaged nerves like electricity. But Emma smiled. The worse her tremors got, the less threatening she appeared. Who would suspect a woman who could barely hold her passport steady of being one of the world's deadliest operators? Russian customs was exactly as she remembered, from a mission 8 years ago, efficient, suspicious, and corrupt enough to be useful. The officer examining her documents, a thick-necked man with Stalin's mustache, frowned at her shaking hands. "Purpose of visit?" he asked in heavily accented English. "Photography," Emma replied, letting her voice quaver slightly. "Wildlife in winter for National Geographic." She fumbled with her camera bag, deliberately clumsy. The officer's suspicion melted into dismissive contempt. Another stupid American tourist who didn't understand Russian winters. He stamped her passport hard enough to make her jump, a calculated flinch that sealed his assessment of her as harmless. "Welcome to Moscow," he said with a smirk that suggested she wouldn't be welcome long. Outside the airport, the city sprawled in all its brutal glory. Soviet-era blocks mixed with gleaming oligarch towers, old Moscow wrestling with new money for dominance. Emma took a taxi, giving the driver an address 3 blocks from her real destination. As they drove through streets lined with snow turned black by exhaust, she spotted them. 2 cars following at professional distances, changing positions every few miles. They were good, but she'd been expecting them. At her decoy hotel, a tourist trap near Red Square, Emma made a show of checking in, struggling with her luggage, dropping her room key twice with trembling fingers. The watchers would report back. The angel had landed, and she was even more damaged than intelligence suggested. Perfect. But Emma Thompson, the terrified clerk, had taught Emma Williams something valuable. People see what they expect to see. They expected a broken soldier trying to play hero. She'd give them exactly that. In her room, she opened her camera case and began assembling something that definitely wasn't a camera. Each piece clicked into place with satisfying precision, her trembling hands steadying through pure muscle memory. It wasn't a sniper rifle, those days were behind her. It was something more suited to her current condition. A compact crossbow with specialized bolts, silent and deadly at close range, requiring strength and timing rather than rock-steady hands. Her phone buzzed, a message in Russian. "The package awaits delivery. Warehouse 47, Elektrozavodskaya. Come alone, little angel." Emma smiled. They thought they were taunting her. They didn't realize they'd just confirmed Michael was alive and exactly where Two's intelligence had placed him. She looked out her window at the Moscow skyline, where somewhere in that frozen maze of concrete and corruption, Archangel 1 was waiting. 3 years they'd both believed the other was dead. 3 years of living as ghosts. Tomorrow night, she'd walk into their trap. And tomorrow night, Moscow would learn what Fort Bragg had discovered that morning, that the most dangerous person in any room is the one everyone underestimates. Emma's hands shook as she loaded the crossbow bolts, each one tipped with something special from her NSA friends. Not poison, too traceable, something better, a paralytic agent that mimicked severe hypothermia. In this weather, victims would appear to have simply frozen to death. The Angel of Death was ready for her final mission,